maybe that hymn, although it sounds like a dirge a little bit, right? Funeral dirge. Maybe that hymn tells it all for our sermon. But I think like Martin Luther King said, you know, when you talk about good and evil, he said the real problem is the people that just stand aside, right? And don't take a stand. And sometimes that's the issue that we have when we're trying to figure out what the truth is. Before I begin, I want to recognize the following references that I used in this sermon. The Bible Hub website, article on the philosophical climate of the first century Roman world. What did Pilate mean by asking what is truth? Thought.com's article by Dr. Richard Nordquist on Francis Bacon's essay of truth. And America Magazine's article this past month by James Keene entitled, When the Lie Becomes Too Much, Blaming Renee Good for Her Own Murder. The stories of Jesus' death, the Easter stories that we're in right now, were written decades after his death. And many believe them to be good stories with good meaning, but not necessarily factual. The Gospel of John, the last written of the Gospels, was not even written in Aramaic. It was written in Greek, which was not Jesus' language. So the narratives there are even more suspect. Nevertheless, perhaps there are lessons to be learned from 2,000 years ago. According to the story, the Jewish government was not allowed to condemn someone to death. So they sent Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the prefect or the Roman governor of Judea, from AD 26 to 36 under the emperor Tiberius. Jesus said to Pontius Pilate in this story, quote, "The reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. And according to the gospel story, Pilate did not stay for an answer. And as the story goes, he washed his hands of culpability in Jesus' death. So the question remains 2,000 years later, what is truth? What do you think truth was in that case of Jesus? Most likely, Jesus was apprehended as a rabble-rouser. He was responsible for the disruption of the important Jewish commercial market, which was in front of the temple, and of the delicate balance of power between Jewish and Roman authorities. There would have been no conversations, no negotiations with ultimate authorities, only a quick and brutal consequence for his action, and little his family, friends, and followers could have done to shed truth on the matter. In his essay on truth in 1665, philosopher and statesman Francis Bacon addressed the story of Jesus and Pilate, and he said that Pilate was just a jesting Pilate. He had no intention of wanting an answer to what is truth. By the first century, classical confidence in objective truth had eroded. Skeptics denied certainty. Epicureans reduced the good to pleasure. Followers of Plato endured more as rhetoric than conviction. Cicero made the complaint, quote, "So many schools, so many opinions." And this captured the ambiance. So how would Pilate, educated in Roman pragmatism, regard the truth? Well, he probably regarded truth claims as merely tools that would have been subservient to his power. Using cynical skepticism, he would have dismissed the nature of truth, saying, "Truth is unknowable. Why bother?" Using political evasion, which we see in Iker among leaders, he would use truth as a tool to evade the actual truth in order to maintain or obtain his power and control. If he used philosophical inquiry, it would have been a very fleeting, half-serious search for truth and meaning, which he would have quickly abandoned when reality hit, that this opposition figure needed to be taken care of, and quickly. Otherwise, his power might be eroded. So, 2,000 years later, Do we see any similarities with our current leaders? Of course, it works. Roosevelt University Associate Professor Svozar Minkoff said Francis Bacon addressed the question of truth as follows. Now listen to these things, okay? Because we all, I think, do one or the other. Is it worse to lie to others or to oneself? Or to possess truth but lie when necessary to others? Or to think that we possess the truth but be mistaken and hence unintentionally convey falsehoods to both ourselves and others? Bacon concluded that we have a natural inclination to lie to others. It's natural, though corrupt, love of the lie itself. So today we face a crisis of truth. We face a death of truth almost daily in our lives. It's a slippery slide of nuances and lies that disconnect us from actually knowing what to wrestle with as the truth. It's not new, but with instant and unchecked media, it is greatly amplified today. I want to look at two events. First was 1980, 46 years ago. There was no significant social media, no cell phones, no witnesses to speak the truth. In an article in America Magazine in March of this year entitled "When the Lie Becomes Too Much," blaming Renee Good for her own murder by James Keene, he starts with this quote, "The nuns were not nuns. The nuns were also political activists." These infamous words were spoken in 1980 by Jeane Kirkpatrick, one of the top foreign policy advisors to President Ronald Reagan, of the brutal murders of 4 American women, 3 of them nuns, by the government forces in El Salvador. The Maryknoll sisters, Mara Clark, Ida Ford, Ursuline sister Dorothy Cazell, and lay missionary Jean Donovan, had been raped, killed, and dumped in a shallow grave on May 2nd, 1980, by the soldiers of the National Guard in El Salvador, on orders from higher up. Now, Ms. Kirkpatrick sensed correctly that such a savage crime might turn public opinion against the massive military and economic aid the United States was providing to the junta in El Salvador. So why not put the responsibility of the unarmed, defenseless nuns instead? After all, they're already dead. The lies grew. A few months later, U.S. Secretary of State Alexander Haig suggested that the nuns were to blame for their own murder, saying, "I'd like to suggest," quote, "that perhaps the vehicle the nuns were riding in may have tried to run through a roadblock." He later removed the U.S. ambassador to El Salvador, Robert White, after Mr. White stated publicly there was no evidence that the Salvadoran government was conducting a serious investigation of any kind to find the truth about the murder of the nuns. Now, it took the effort of many Catholics and non-Catholics to fight these lies that were being said by both the El Salvadorian and the U.S. government. And these lies were bent on protecting the government there, the oppressive government, but that served the United States' interests. And the efforts prevailed. It took years. The murder of these women was not the end. It was the tip of the iceberg. Thousands more Salvadorians were murdered. It wasn't until the murder of Catholic Archbishop Oscar Romero, 6 Jesuits, and 2 laywomen in the cathedral by the Salvadorian military in 1989 that the evidence was just so overwhelming that the American politicians could not justify it. As James Keene said in his article, it just became impossible to believe the lies anymore. Now, imagine if that truth had been spoken. How many mothers and fathers would not have been grieving the death of their children? How many young people would have been future leaders of El Salvador, thriving? But that was destroyed. And to this day, El Salvador continues to have an oppressive government. Now, fast forward to last year, the murders of Renee Good and Alex Predis by the U.S. government Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis. We know that truth by our government officials was again very dead. They lied from the beginning. Before any evidence was released, they were called terrorists, domestic terrorists, but the videos showed the truth. Social media has its pros and its cons, right? And the videos showed the truth. Now, that doesn't stop the lying. In fact, people double down on the lies, and they shout even more. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt once said, just because you shout louder does not make it true. And that is the case. However, a lot of people do that. So the screaming more and more through social media and the mainstream media produced more lies. But truth was truly resurrected by the community. The government officials, although they still have done nothing regarding the case, had to succumb, at least to some degree. The result was a quick reduction of thousands of ICE agents, the resignation of the chief instigator of these ICE tactics, and the ultimate removal of a cabinet member. These changes were made, but don't think for a minute that truth has been fully resurrected by our government. The lying machine is for a purpose, and we know what that purpose is. For better or worse, it's to maintain power and control, and it controls the narrative. So we know people do this because they think it's the right thing to do. But sometimes they know it's the wrong thing to do, and they still will do it. And that was the polemic that we heard about earlier. Changes were made to appease the populace, and that's us. But guess what? The populace has a very short memory. And they know if they can distract and move on, that we'll be thinking about something else soon and not thinking about that. If you don't think that's true, think about Ukraine today. How much is it on the news? Not as much, because Iran is in the news, right? We tend to think about one thing and not on the other. But I want to reflect on these lies a little further. We know recently a person was murdered by an individual that happens to be in the United States without proper documentation, which, by the way, is a civil offense, not a criminal offense. Now, one of our news station, and I won't mention any names, but its initials are Fox, will focus on this one individual. And let me say that murder is horrible. It's horrible. But Fox News is not necessarily concerned about that. What they want to convey is fear, especially among their audience, which tends to be primarily an older audience, but not exclusively, who will then see a person on the street tomorrow and think, I wonder if they're a murderer too, because they're a different color and they speak a different language. The truth is that hundreds of American citizens were murdered at the same time by good old other American citizens, right? A minuscule number are murdered by undocumented individuals. But that does not align with the narrative of fear, which people want to use to captivate their audience. And that is a lie. So we see all this true. We see the chaos that's fed to us, drains our energy, diverts us from knowing what's really true. What do we do as Unitarian Universalists? Okay, are we able to see deeper currents of truth, of hope, positivity, creation in all of this? For example, we see Florida banning books, taking away women's rights, taking away black voting rights. But under the current of all of this, we have knowledge that we too have power. That's true. We too influence elections. That's true. We influence choices. So even if we see here, we understand the pendulum. We want to be on that pendulum. These are the truths we're embracing. We know that renewable energy is being currently set aside. But you know what? We also know the truth. Renewable energy is our future. And more importantly, renewable energy gives people more freedom, which some people don't want. It's easier for us to focus on the negative than the positive. And let's be clear, the powerful understand how to market lies. And there are a lot of people that want to believe these lies. They live in fear sometimes, and they also live in a black and white sense, not a gray. It's either this or it's that. They don't want to know that the truth is actually in between. So what's our counterweight to the falsehoods? All right, before I ask that, I would like to have a reality check here. Do we even have a counterweight? All 150 of us against the world? Okay, how many of you have been on a seesaw? Raise your hand. It might have been a while. Okay, you've been on a seesaw. Okay, you ever been on a seesaw where one of you was either much lighter or much heavier? What happens when the heavier person goes down? That's it. You're on top, okay? Or you're down on the bottom. Once the heavier person goes to the bottom, there is not a counterweight to allow that person on top to come down, unless the other person lets them down, right? So there's some important lessons to be learned. One, the powerful do not give up voluntarily, right? Why would somebody? Okay. Two, those in power can be worn down. Remember, the person on top has certain abilities. One, they can talk, they can scream, they can sing, they can otherwise drive that person crazy until they let them down. Three, the person on top can jump off the side or the back. Now, it may not be easy, it may hurt a little, but it demonstrates the freedom that we have over people that are telling us powerful lies. This is what happened in Minneapolis. Those in power with ICE and our current administration did not give up easily, and they won't. But the people in Minneapolis and around the country, from various backgrounds, beliefs, political parties, band together to protest ICE in their city. The tragic deaths and accosting of U.S. citizens and legal residents caused many to jump off that seesaw and confront the powers more severely. So the truth of a group that was not equally balanced with the weight of the powerful was able to prevail. To a large degree, great sacrifice, including death. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk and prophet, said before he died a few years ago that the next Buddha will be the Sangha. The Sangha in Buddhist terminology is the community of practitioners. This is the idea that we don't have to look to an individual for a savior. It is indeed our civil society that will save our society, and not through war or violence, but through caregiving for each other and confronting those who do not want to do us harm. When Jesus died 2,000 years ago, it was his followers that kept a message going. Today, we are not powerless. We believe that our universe, particularly our planet, individuals are called to speak truth and to lead. Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, Mother Teresa, St. Francis, Desmond Tutu, Jesus, Martin Luther King, and so many more of the prophets were called to speak the truth. But the movement for change in truth is a movement of the Sangha. It is the movement of the community. Individuals can lead, but it is the community actions that make the difference. So as Unitarian Universalists, I would say on the seesaw, we're on top. We're not on the bottom. Okay? But we have allies, and we use those allies, and we work with those allies, and we will take our voice and be heard, and our actions will be seen. You know, we're doing our campus renewal right now, and it's bringing a new presence of liberty and freedom. We still continue our support of our refugee community with our classes and with our food distribution each week. We've opened our campus to the Thrive community, which is a program for homeschooling that's here, which is a very open-minded program. We're hosting the Resistance Choir. And as we open up to our wider community, our presence of our beacon of light will be seen. Connecting with iCare, we're going to talk about that because we've got the Nehemiah Assembly coming up a week from tomorrow. One Jacks, which will be here next week, next Friday. We connect with a wider community. We connect in truth and in freedom. Now, just to finish, our weight does become heavier. It is more difficult because death and resurrection. If anybody's gone through that, anybody gone through that here? Sounds painful, doesn't it? It is a beautiful experience when you consider the chrysalis to the butterfly. But if you're inside that cocoon, probably doesn't feel so beautiful during that time. So we learn from this. We don't tire. We rest in inner peace. We understand that we face external turmoil. Do we get anxious, depressed, exhausted, sick to our stomach? This is not for the guests. Of course we do. Do we sometimes wonder, what is the truth? Of course. Are we sometimes wrong? Never. Oh, okay, no. We are wrong occasionally. But remember, social media and the powers that be, even through mainstream media, purposely make us doubt our truths. They promote facts and data that turn out to be completely made up. So, if I haven't mentioned it enough, first and foremost, take care of yourself. Take care of ourselves. Doubts, anxiety, depression, they're actually tools that can be used against us. As we embrace the truth of what we're feeling, let's take measures needed to take care of ourselves. Sometimes that means rest, getting medical help. Sometimes it means taking a step back from the front line. Sometimes the universe calls you to push forward instead of and in spite of the obstacles. Just remember, you're always at liberty to make your own choices for the quest for truth. As Unitarian Universalists, we're not afraid to be on top of the seesaw. It's where we are in this universe. We have a voice, and maybe it's a good place to be. We are the Sangha. We are part of the ongoing resurrection of truth, again and again and again. And just when you think you're done, there's a Haitian proverb that says, as soon as you climb the mountain, you look over, and what is there? Another mountain. And I think that's true. Our resurrection of truth is a resurrection that we speak every Sunday here, and we live with our principles every day. This is our call, our mission, our spirit. This is our beacon of light in the world. Let it be. Thank you.